3 months had passed since Jin left the refugee district of Vestin 7. In that time he had traveled across the galaxy to the Dasari homeworld, a planet of crystal towers and floating gardens. That made everything he had ever seen look like dust. He had studied Dasari law and customs, with tutors who barely hid their contempt for the human child their matriarch had chosen. He had learned the basics of trade, negotiations, and corporate governance, and now he stood before the full council of the Dasari Trade Consortium, facing the family that had tried to murder Vekarati. Council chamber was a massive hall of white stone and silver light. Hundreds of Dasari nobles sat in tiered rows, their 4 eyes fixed on the small human at the center of the room. Vekora sat on an elevated platform behind Jin, watching everything with calm attention. Her treacherous children and grandchildren stood on the opposite side of the chamber, their faces twisted with barely concealed rage. "This is an outrage," declared Vekora's eldest son, a tall Dasari named Corvith, whose robes dripped with expensive jewels. "Our mother has clearly lost her mind, naming an alien child as heir to the greatest Dasari fortune in history." Murmurs of agreement rippled through parts of the crowd. "The human has no understanding of our ways," added Corvith's sister Melina. "He cannot possibly manage the consortium. This will destroy everything our family has built." The council head, an ancient Dasari named Elder Sorvan, raised his hand for silence. "The law is clear," he said in a dry voice. "The matriarch may name any heir she chooses. The question before this council is whether to validate the claim." "Then let us hear from this human," Korra sneered. "Let him explain why he thinks he deserves what rightfully belongs to us." Elder Sorvan nodded and looked at Jin. "Young human," he said, "you stand accused of taking advantage of an elderly Dasari in a weakened state. What do you say to this charge?" Jin stepped forward, and despite his nervousness, his voice was steady. "I did not ask for any of this," he said. "When I found Vekora, she was starving in an alley. I shared my food because she was hungry, not because I wanted something from her." "A likely story," Corvith interrupted. "You expect us to believe that a refugee child helped a Dasari without expecting reward." "I expect nothing," Jin said. "I did what my mother taught me to do. I helped someone who needed help. And what do you know of running a trade empire?" Melina demanded. "What qualifications does a human orphan have to manage trillions of credits?" Jin thought carefully before answering. "I know how to listen to people," he said finally. "I know how to see when someone is struggling and needs support. I know that wealth means nothing if it is not used to help others." He looked around the vast chamber at all the wealthy nobles in their fine clothes. "I have seen what greed does to people," he continued. "I have watched families in the refugee district share their last scraps of food while rich traders pass by without a glance." His eyes settled on Corvith and Melina. "And I have seen what greed did to Vekora's own children," he said. "You had everything, and it was not enough. You tried to kill your own mother for more." The chamber erupted in shocked whisper. Corvith's face turned dark with fury. "You dare accuse us without proof?" He snarled. "I have proof," Vekora said. Rising from her seat for the first time, she activated a device that projected images into the air above the council. The images showed private messages between her children planning the coup. They showed financial records of bribes paid to guards and officials. They showed surveillance footage of Vekora being drugged and carried onto a ship. These records were recovered from backup systems my children did not know existed, Vekora said. They document every step of the conspiracy against me. The council chamber fell silent. Elder Solvan studied the evidence with his ancient eyes, then turned to look at Corvith and Melina with disgust. "The evidence is undeniable," he declared. "The charges of conspiracy and attempted murder are proven. Guards moved to surround the conspirators. This changes nothing about the human." Corvus shouted desperately. He is still unfit to lead the consortium. Elder Sorvan raised his hand again. The council will now vote, he said. All those in favor of validating Jin Taiwu as rightful heir to Matriarch Vekara Shendai, one by one. Hands rose throughout the chamber, not all of them. But more than enough, the motion passes, Elder Sorvan announced. Jin Taiwu is recognized as heir to the Shendai fortune and all associated holdings. Vekara walked down to stand beside Jin. It is done, she said. Everything I've built is now yours to guide. Jin looked at her with eyes full of emotion. I will try to make you proud, he said. You already have. Vekara replied. The next week passed in a blur of ceremonies and documents and meetings that made Jin's head spin, but finally he was able to do what he had wanted to do since the moment he arrived on the Zari homeworld. He returned to Vestin 7. The ship landed in the same empty lot where Vekara's guards had found him 3 months ago. Jin walked down the ramp alone, wearing simple clothes instead of the fine robes his new position allowed. He walked through the familiar streets of the refugee district, past the spaceport where he had worked, past the sick house where old Quan still received care. Word spread quickly that he had returned, and soon people lined the streets to see the boy, who had become one of the richest beings in the galaxy. Jin stopped in front of his old shelter and looked at the place where everything had begun. Then he turned and addressed the crowd that had gathered. I am not here to show off my new wealth, he said. I am here to keep a promise. He announced plans to rebuild the refugee district into a proper community with clean housing and medical facilities and schools. He announced programs to help refugees of all species find work and dignity. He announced that no one in this district would ever go hungry again. As long as he had breath in his body, the crowd cheered. And Jin felt something warm in his chest that had nothing to do with money or power. When the crowd finally dispersed, Jin walked to the alley where he had first found Vekaran there, sitting against the same wall. He saw a small figure huddled in the shadows. It was a young Dasari girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. Her silver skin was dull from hunger, and her 4 eyes barely glowed. She looked exactly like Vekara had looked on that rainy night. Jin sat down beside her without saying a word, reached into his pack and pulled out a meal. The same simple food he used to buy with his daily wages. He held it out to her. The girl looked at him with suspicion and fear. Why would you help me? She whispered. Jin smiled gently. You looked hungry, he said. That is enough reason. From a distance, Vekara watched the scene unfold. She and followed Jin to see what he would do with his new power. Now she had her answer. He was doing exactly what he had always done. He was being kind. Tears rolled down her silver cheeks as she finally understood what humans meant when they talked about wealth. It was not about credits or possessions or power. It was about this moment, this simple act of one being helping another. It was about a circle of kindness that never ended, and it was the most valuable thing in the universe. The young Dasari girl took the food and began to eat. Jin sat with her and asked her name and listened to her story. Above them, the stars came out one by one. The same stars that had watched over Jin on all those difficult nights, but they did not look cold anymore. They looked like hope. The next morning, Vekara woke Jin before sunrise and told him they needed to talk. There was something different about her today, something in the way she held herself that Jin had not seen before. She stood straighter and her 4 eyes glowed brighter than ever. I have not been honest with you, Vekara began. My name is Vekara, that much is true, but I am not just a homeless refugee. Jin listened quietly, sensing that whatever she was about to say was important. My full name is Matriarch Vekara Shendai, she continued. I am the rightful head of the Zasari Trade Consortium. Jin blinked in confusion. He had heard of the trade consortium even here in the refugee district. Everyone had heard of it. It was one of the largest and wealthiest organizations in the entire galaxy, controlling shipping routes and trade agreements across hundreds of star systems. I do not understand, Jin said slowly. If you are a matriarch, why are you here? Vekara sat down beside him and told him everything she told him about building the consortium over decades of careful work and smart decisions. She told him about her family, the children and grandchildren she had trusted with positions of power. She told him about the betrayal, how they had conspired together to freeze her accounts and steal her authority. She told him about being kidnapped from her own home and abandoned on this distant border world with nothing but the clothes on her back. They thought I would die here, Vekara said. They thought the great matriarch would fade away among what they called the primitive humans, and no one would ever know what happened to me. Jin felt anger rising in his chest on her behalf. Your own family did this to you? He asked. Yes, Vekara said, but their plan had one flaw. They forgot that old Asari law gives the matriarch the right to name her heir, and I never named any of them. What does that mean? Jin asked. Vekara looked at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. It means that everything I built, everything I own, all of it waits for whoever I choose to inherit it, she said. And I have been searching for months to find someone worthy of that choice. Jin was beginning to understand, and he did not like where this was going. Vekara, he said carefully. Why are you telling me this? Because I tested you, she said. From the moment you shared your meal with me, I have been watching and testing you. She explained everything. The treasure in the ruins was a test to see if he would take what belonged to someone else. Her collapse was fake to see if he would abandon her when given the chance to steal. She had watched him work and struggle and give away what little he had to help others. She had seen him fight to protect money meant for strangers. She had witnessed kindness after kindness from a boy who had every reason to be bitter and selfish. I have met thousands of beings in my life, Vekara said. Wealthy ones and poor ones, powerful ones and weak ones, aliens of every species in the galaxy, and none of them have been like you. Jin did not know what to say. I approached many others before I found you, Vekara continued. They either tried to use me for their own gain, or they ignored me completely. Only you helped without asking what you would get in return. Only you chose my life over fortune when you thought no one was watching. She reached into her tattered robes and pulled out a small device that Jin had never seen before. This is a beacon, she explained. When I activate it, my last remaining loyal servants will come for me. Then activate it, Jin said immediately. Go home and take back what is yours. Vekara smiled at his response. Of course, his first thought was for her, not for himself. I will, she said. But first, I need to tell you what happens next. She pressed a button on the device, and a soft light began to pulse. Under the Sari law, I have the right to adopt an heir of any species, she said. This heir inherits everything when I choose to transfer authority. It does not matter if they are the Sari or human or anything else. Jin felt his heart beating faster. Vekara, what are you saying? He asked. I am saying that I want to name you as my heir, she said. I want to give you everything I have built. Jin stood up and took a step back, shaking his head. I cannot accept that, he said. I am just a kid from the refugee district. I do not know anything about running a trade empire. You know what matters, Vekara said firmly. You know how to be kind, you know how to be honest. You know how to put others before yourself. Those are things that cannot be taught. But why me? Jin asked, and his voice cracked with emotion. There must be others more qualified, more deserving. Vekara stood and walked over to him. She placed her hands on his shoulders and looked into his eyes. I did not save you that day in the alley, she said quietly. You saved me, Not just my body, but my belief that goodness still exists. That is worth more than all the credits in the galaxy. Before Jin could respond, the sound of engines filled the air. A sleek ship descended through the clouds and landed in the empty lot near their shelter. Door opened and the Sari emerged, all wearing the formal armor of the Consortium Guard. They approached quickly and stopped when they saw Vekora standing beside a human child. Matriarch, the lead guard said, dropping to one knee, "We have searched for you for months." "I know." "Tarek," Vekora said, "rise and meet the one who kept me alive when all others would have let me die." The guards looked at Jin with obvious confusion and something that might have been discussed. "This human?" Tarek asked. "Surely you were aided by someone more suitable." "There is no one more suitable in all the galaxy," Vekora said, and her voice carried the authority of a ruler. "This boy showed me more honor and compassion than any Thesari I have ever known." She turned to face all three guards and spoke in a formal tone. "Hear me and witness," she said. "By my authority as matriarch of the Shendai line, I hereby name Jin Taiwu of Earth as my adopted heir." The guards gasped in shock. "Matriarch, this is highly irregular," Tarek said. "It is my right under ancient law," Vekora replied. "Do you challenge this?" The guards exchanged uncertain looks, but none of them spoke against her. "Then it is done," Vekora said. "Record it in your presence, as tradition demands." She turned back to Jin, who looked like he might faint. "You can still refuse," she said gently. "I will not force this on you, but I hope you will accept." Jin looked at the guards in their shining armor. He looked at the ship that probably cost more than the entire refugee district. He looked at Vekora, the ancient alien who had become his friend. "I do not want to be rich," he said finally. "But if being your heir means I can help people, then I will try." Vekora smiled wider than Jin had ever seen. "That is exactly the right answer," she said. She embraced him then, the powerful matriarch and the orphan boy. And for a moment they were simply two beings who had found family in the most unlikely place. "Come," Vekora said when she released him. "We have much work to do and a family of traitors to deal with." Jin nodded and followed her toward the ship. As he walked, he looked back at the refugee district one more time. He made a silent promise that he would return. He would not forget where he came from, and he would not forget the people he was leaving behind. 2 weeks had passed, and Vekora had grown stronger with each day. Jin continued to share his food and his shelter. And slowly the color returned to her silver skin, and the glow returned to her 4 eyes. They had become something like friends, though neither of them used that word. One evening as they sat together watching the sun set over the metal rooftops, Vekora turned to Jin with a serious expression. "I want to show you something," she said. "Something that could change your life forever." Jin looked at her curiously, but said nothing. "Before I came to this district, I hid something valuable in the old spaceport ruins," Vekora continued. "The Zari artifacts worth more credits than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. Jin's eyes widened slightly, but he did not interrupt. "I want to take you there," Vekora said. "I want to give these things to you as payment for your kindness." "You do not owe me anything," Jin said quickly. "I helped you because you needed help, not because I wanted payment." "I know," Vekora said, "but I want to do this anyway. Please let me repay you." Jin thought about it for a long moment. He thought about all the people he could help if he had real money. He thought about old Kwan at the sick house who needed expensive medicine. He thought about the younger orphans in the district who had even less than he did. "Okay," he said finally. "Show me." They left at dawn the next morning, walking through the quiet streets toward the abandoned section of the old spaceport. It had been destroyed during the early days of the trade wars and never rebuilt. Now it was a maze of broken Ships and collapsed buildings were only the desperate went Vekora led Jin through the ruins with surprising confidence, as if she had walked this path many times before. After an hour of climbing over debris and crawling through narrow passages, they reached a hidden chamber deep inside what had once been a luxury transport vessel. Inside the chamber were three objects that seemed to glow with their own inner light too. Were small statues made of crystal that shifted colors as Jin looked at them. The third was a medallion on a silver chain, covered in symbols that Jin did not recognize. "These belong to my grandmother," Vekora said. "They are among the most precious artifacts in the Sari culture. Any collector would pay a fortune for them." Jin stared at the objects for a long moment. Then he looked at Vekora with a strange expression. "These were your grandmother's?" he asked. "Yes," Vekora said. "Then I cannot take them," Jin said firmly. Vekora had been prepared for many reactions, but not this one. "What do you mean?" she asked. "These could solve all your problems. You would never be hungry again. They are your family treasures," Jin said. "Taking them would be wrong. It would be like stealing your memories. I am offering them freely," Vekora pressed. "It is not stealing if I give them to you." Jin shook his head. "My mother left me one thing when she died," he said. "A small wooden box she had carried all the way from Earth. It is worthless to anyone else, but it means everything to me." He looked at the glowing artifacts with respect rather than greed. "If someone offered me a fortune for that box, I would refuse," he continued. "These things are part of who you are. You should keep them." Vekora felt something tighten in her chest. In all her years she had seen beings betray their closest friends for a fraction of this wealth. She had watched her own children plot against her for money they did not even need. And here was a boy who had nothing refusing a fortune because it felt wrong to take another person's memories. "You are remarkable," Vekora said softly. Jin shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "I am just trying to do what is right," he said. Vekora nodded slowly. But she was not finished yet. She needed to be absolutely certain. "I understand," she said. "But the journey has tired me. Can we rest here for a moment before going back?" Jin agreed, and they sat down against the wall of the chamber. After a few minutes, Vekora let out a soft groan and slumped over, her eyes closing. "Vekora?" Jin said with alarm. She did not respond. Jin checked her breathing and found it shallow, but steady. She appeared to have collapsed from exhaustion, which made sense given how far they had walked. Jin looked at her unconscious form, then looked at the priceless artifacts sitting just a few steps away. No one would know he could take them and leave right. Vekora might not even remember bringing him here when she woke up. He could sell just one of those statues and have enough money to feed himself for years. He could help so many people with that kind of wealth. Jin stood up and walked toward the artifacts. He reached out his hand, then he stopped. He pulled his hand back and turned away from the treasures instead. He knelt beside Vekora and carefully lifted her onto his back. She was heavier than he expected, and his legs shook under the weight. But he began the long journey back through the ruins, carrying her with every step. It took 3 times as long to return. While carrying her several times, Jin had to stop and rest, his muscles screaming and his lungs burning. But he never once considered going back for the artifacts. When they finally reached the edge of the refugee district, Vekora opened her eyes. Jin did not notice because he was focused on not falling. "You can put me down now," she said quietly. Jin jumped in surprise and nearly dropped her. "You are awake," he said with relief. "How do you feel?" Vekora climbed off his back and stood on her own feet. She looked at him with those 4 glowing eyes, and there were tears in them. "You left everything behind," she said. "You could have taken it all and no one would have known." Jin looked confused. "You were sick," he said. "Getting you to safety was more important than any treasure." "Why?" Vekara asked, and her voice trembled with the question, "Why would you choose me over a fortune?" Jin thought about it seriously, as if the answer was obvious, and he was trying to find words for something he had always known. "My mother told me that a person's true wealth is measured by what they give, not what they take," he said finally. "Those artifacts would have made me rich, but leaving you behind would have made me poor in a way that matters more." Vekara stared at him for a long moment. Then she did something she had not done in many years. She laughed. It was not a mocking laugh or a bitter laugh. It was a laugh of pure joy. The laugh of someone who has searched for something precious and finally found it. "What is funny?" Jin asked, looking worried that he had said something wrong. Vekara shook her head and wiped the tears from her eyes. "Nothing is funny," she said. "Everything is wonderful. And tomorrow I will explain why." She put her hand on his shoulder and squeezed gently. "Thank you, Jin Taiwu," she said. "You have given me something far more valuable than anything in that chamber." Jin still looked confused, but he nodded. "You are welcome," he said. "Now let us go home. I think we could both use some rest." They walked back to the shelter together, and Vekara smiled the entire way. Tomorrow she would tell him the truth about who she really was. Tomorrow everything would change, but tonight she simply enjoyed walking beside the most extraordinary being she had ever met. 3 days had passed since Jin shared his meal with the alien called Vekarash, had stayed near his shelter as he suggested, and each morning he brought her whatever food he could spare from his own small portions. He never complained about this, never made her feel like a burden, and never asked for anything in return. Vekara watched him leave each day before dawn to search for work at the spaceport or the market stalls. She watched him return each evening, sometimes with food and sometimes with nothing at all, and she watched how he treated everyone he met along the way. On the 4th day, Vekara decided to follow him. She kept her distance, using skills she had learned many decades ago when she was young and the galaxy was a more dangerous place. Jin never noticed her. Trailing behind him through the crowded streets at the spaceport, Jin approached a cargo master and asked for work. The alien employer, a fat creature with 6 arms and skin like orange leather, looked at the small human boy and laughed. "You want to move freight?" The cargo master said, "You are barely bigger than the boxes." "I am stronger than I look," Jin said. "Give me a chance and I will prove it." The cargo master agreed. But Vekara saw the cruel smile on his face and knew what was coming. Jin worked for 8 hours without rest, hauling containers that weighed almost as much as he did. When he finished, the cargo master handed him only half the promised payment. "You were too slow," the employer said. "Be faster next time if you want full wages." Jin opened his mouth to argue, but then closed it and simply nodded. He took the small amount of credits and walked away. Vekara felt anger rise in her chest at this injustice, but she was more interested in what Jin would do next. Any other being would have cursed their luck or sought revenge. Jin walked to a fruit stall and bought the cheapest meal available. Then he walked to a building where sick refugees were being cared for by volunteer workers. A woman inside smiled when she saw him. "Jin," she said. "You came back. I promised I would," Jin said, and he handed her the meal he had just bought. "This is for old Quan. The medicine should work better if he eats something, but this was supposed to be your dinner." The woman said, "I will find something else," Jin said. "He needs it more than me." Vekara watched from outside the window, and something inside her shifted. This boy had been cheated out of half his pay and worked until his body must be screaming with pain. And his first thought was to help a sick old man he was not even related to in all her years of running the greatest trade empire in the galaxy. Vekara had never seen anything like this. She thought back to her own life before the betrayal. She had been matriarch Vekara Shendai, Head of the Zazari Trade Consortium, her fortune was larger than the entire economy of most planets she had controlled, shipping routes across 100 star systems and employed millions of beings of every species, but her own family had grown. Greedy, her sons and daughters, her nieces and nephews. They had all conspired together to take what was hers. They had frozen her accounts, bribed her guards, and dumped her on this remote border world where they assumed she would die quietly. Among the humans, they thought she was too old and too weak to survive. They thought no one would help a Thesari who had nothing to offer. For months, Vekara had wandered the refugee districts of different colonies, testing the beings she met. She had approached wealthy aliens of her own status and asked for small help. They had either ignored her or tried to discover if she had any hidden value they could exploit. She had approached middle-class merchants and workers of various species. They had shooed her away like a pest, too busy with their own lives to care about a starving elder. She had even approached other Thesari refugees, hoping her own kind might show compassion. They had recognized her as lowborn based on her ragged clothes and turned their backs. Only one being in all those months had helped her without asking questions. Only one being had shared everything he had with a stranger, a human child who owned almost nothing. Vekara continued to watch Jin for the next several days. She saw him get pushed around by older kids who wanted to steal his earnings. She saw him stand up and fight back, not to protect himself, but because the money was meant for others. She saw him lose that fight, saw him lying in the mud with a bloody nose and empty pockets, and saw him get up and go right back to work the next morning. On the 7th day, she saw something that finally made her reveal herself. Jin was walking home through a bad part of the district when 3 teenage boys surrounded him. They were bigger and stronger, and they had weapons. "Give us everything you have," the leader said, "or we break your legs." Jin stood his ground, even though he was shaking. "I have nothing worth taking," he said. "I already spent my pay on medicine for the sick house." The leader did not believe him and ordered the others to search Jin. When they found nothing, they got angry. "You wasted our time," the leader growled. "Now you pay with pain." He raised his weapon to strike. Jin Vekara moved faster than anyone expected. She came out of the shadows like a ghost, her old body suddenly remembering the combat training of her youth. She grabbed the leader's arm and twisted it until he screamed and dropped his weapon. The other 2 boys tried to attack her, but she was already moving, using their own force against them until all 3 were on the ground. "Run," she said to them in a voice cold as deep space, "and never come back to this street." They ran. Jin stared at her with wide eyes. "Vekara," he said, "how did you do that?" "I was not always old and weak," she said simply. Then she looked at him more closely and saw the fear still fading from his eyes. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Jin shook his head, then looked at her with concern that surprised her. "Are you hurt?" he asked back. "You move so fast. You might have pulled something." Vekara almost laughed. This boy had nearly been beaten bloody, and his first thought was her well-being. "I am fine," she said. They walked back toward the shelter together in silence. When they arrived, Jin sat down and finally let out a long breath. "Thank you for saving me," he said. "You saved me first," Vekara replied. "I am simply returning the favor," Jin smiled. And it was a smile without any shadow of expectation or calculation. It was pure and honest in a way Vekara had not seen in a very long time. "We should look out for each other," Jin said. "That is what people do." Vekara sat down beside him and looked up at the stars appearing in the evening sky. Somewhere out there, her family was spending her fortune and celebrating her death. Somewhere out there, empires rose and fell based on the movement of credits and cargo, but here in this dirty corner of a refugee district, she had found something more valuable than all the wealth she had ever possessed. She had found proof that goodness still existed in the universe, and she had found it in the most unlikely place. The rain fell hard on the metal roofs of the refugee district, creating a sound like thousands of tiny drums beating all at once. Jin Taiwu pressed himself against the wall of an old cargo container, trying to stay dry as he walked home through the narrow streets of Vestin 7. He was 12 years old and had been alone for 2 years now. Ever since the sickness took his mother during the trade wars, his clothes were torn and his shoes had holes in them. But he walked with his head held high, because that was what his mother had taught him to doing. His hand he carried a single meal pack. Earned through 10 hours of hauling heavy boxes at the spaceport, it was not much, but it would keep him alive for another day. The refugee district was home to thousands of beings from across the galaxy who had lost everything in the wars. Humans lived alongside aliens of every shape and size. Though they rarely spoke to each other, trust was a rare thing in these streets. And kindness was even rarer. Jin turned into a narrow alley that served as a shortcut to his shelter when he stopped suddenly. There, on the ground, lay a figure wrapped in torn cloth. Shaking from the cold and the rain at first, Jin thought it was a human. But as he moved closer, he saw silver skin and 4 eyes that flickered weakly in the dim light. It was a Thesari, one of the tall and graceful aliens who were known throughout the galaxy for their wealth and power, but this one looked nothing like the proud Thesari Jin had seen on news broadcasts. This one looked like she was dying. The elderly alien tried to lift her head when she heard Jin approach, but she was too weak. Her 4 eyes, which should have glowed bright purple, were dim and faded. Jin had heard that the Thesari needed special nutrients that were hard to find in human food, and without them, they would slowly starve, even if they ate regular meals. He knelt down beside her, not caring that the muddy water soaked through his pants. "Are you okay?" he asked, knowing it was a foolish question. The Thesari made a sound that might have been a laugh if she had more strength. "I am far from okay, young human," she whispered in a voice like cracking ice. "I have not eaten proper food in many weeks." Jin looked at the meal pack in his hand. It was designed for humans, but it contained some basic proteins and minerals that might help any species survive a little longer. He had worked all day for this single pack. His stomach had been empty since yesterday morning. Without hesitation, he opened the pack and held it out to the alien. "Here," he said. "Eat this." The Thesari's 4 eyes widened in what Jin recognized as shock. "That is your food," she said. "I can see from your body that you are also hungry. I can find more tomorrow," Jin said, though he was not sure if that was true. "You need it now. Why would you share your only meal with a stranger?" The alien asked. "Why would you help someone who is not of your kind?" Jin thought about the question for a moment. He remembered his mother sitting beside him during the early days of the refugee crisis, sharing their small portions with neighbors who had even less. Had told him something then that he had never forgotten. "My mother used to say that hunger shared is hunger halved," Jin said. "She said that when we help others, we help ourselves too, even if we cannot see how." The Thesari stared at him for a long moment, and Jin saw something change in her eyes. It was not just surprise anymore. It was something deeper, something Jin did not have a name for. "Your mother was wise," the alien said softly. She reached out with trembling hands and took the meal pack. Jin watched her eat, making sure she finished every bit of it while she ate. Several other beings passed by the alley entrance. A group of humans glanced in and then looked away, hurrying on through the rain. 2 aliens from a wealthy species Jin did not recognize actually crossed to the other side of the street when they saw the Thesari on the ground. No one else stopped. No one else offered help when the Thesari finished eating. A little color had returned to her silver skin. She looked up at Jin with her 4 eyes now glowing just slightly brighter than before. "What is your name, young human?" she asked. "Jin Tai Wu," he said. "What is yours?" The alien paused for a moment, as if deciding something important. "You may call me Vekara," she said. Jin nodded and stood up. Offering his hand to help her, Vekara took it and slowly got to her feet. Leaning against the container wall for support. "Do you have a place to sleep tonight?" Jin asked. Vekara shook her head. Jin thought about his own shelter. A small space in an abandoned building that he had made comfortable with scraps and old blankets. It was not much, but it was dry and hidden from those who might cause trouble. "You can stay near my place if you want," he said. "There is a covered area outside that will keep the rain off you." "You would offer shelter to someone you just met?" Vekara asked, and again there was that strange look in her eyes. "You needed food and now you need a dry place to sleep," Jin said simply. "Those are not hard things to understand." He began walking toward his shelter. Moving slowly so the weakened alien could keep up, Vekara followed him through the winding streets, watching everything he did with careful attention. When they reached his building, Jin showed her the covered area he had mentioned and brought out one of his blankets for her to use. "This is your blanket," Vekara said. "You should keep it. I have another one inside," Jin said, which was true. Though his second blanket was thin and full of holes, Vekara wrapped herself in the blanket and sat down against the wall. She looked at Jin with an expression he could not read. Something between confusion and wonder. "In all my years, I have never met anyone like you," she said quietly. Jin shrugged, not understanding what she meant. "I just did what anyone would do," he said. "No," Vekara said, and her voice carried a weight that made Jin pay attention. "You did what very few would do, and what almost no one has done for me." Jin did not know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded and said good night. As he lay in his shelter listening to the rain, he thought about the strange alien outside. He wondered what had brought her to such a terrible state. He wondered if she had family somewhere who was looking for her, but mostly he hoped that she would still be there in the morning, because something told him that meeting her was important in a way he could not yet understand. Outside, Vekara sat awake for a long time, staring at the door behind which the human boy slept. In her long life, she had ruled vast empires of commerce and commanded the respect of entire star systems. She had been betrayed by her own blood and left to die among what her people called the primitive species, and now, child with nothing had given her everything he had, asking for nothing in return for the first time in many months. Vekara felt something she had thought was lost forever. She felt hope.